I had imagined a different way to celebrate my 40th birthday. Perhaps a quiet gathering with close friends, enjoying a peaceful dinner, reminiscing about the past, and sharing a few laughs. Instead, it was just my wife of 12 years, Samantha, and me marking our progress. I felt more like an afterthought than the guest of honor as I stood in the center of my own home, surrounded by strangers and fake smiles. This wasn't my party. It never had been. I should have known the moment I walked in and saw the lavish decor, the fine dining, and the expensive champagne flowing freely. This wasn't my celebration. It was Samantha's, or more accurately, it was Demond Carter's. There he was, holding court near the grand piano, surrounded by a group of admiring guests. His perfectly tailored suit and immaculate smile screamed arrogance, a superiority that clung to him like expensive cologne. People either worshipped him or despised him. I fell into the latter group. Samantha tried to hide the late-night text messages, but I had suspected for months. She always dressed a little too carefully for those spontaneous business meetings, but she'd always smile when I didn't have proof, until tonight. I sipped my whiskey slowly, watching as Demond entered the room. Something shifted in Samantha's posture. Her expression changed. She came alive. Her fingers lightly brushed his arm as she laughed, a little too softly, a little too intimately. She hadn't looked at me like that in years. Then Demond delivered the final blow. Raising his glass, flashing that smug grin, he commanded the room's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, his voice practiced and smooth, the same voice that had convinced countless investors to fall for his scams. The guests turned to listen, their eyes flickering between us. Demond's gaze locked onto mine, studying the struggle beneath the surface, the fight to reach the top, where only a select few truly succeed. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. I clenched my jaw as the words buzzed around me. But Demond wasn't finished. He raised his glass slightly higher. "And to those who try and fail," he continued. Some guests laughed nervously, others avoided my gaze. Samantha stayed silent, not correcting him, not even looking at me. And in that moment, I knew she had made her choice. My fingers tightened around my whiskey glass, my knuckles turning white. But instead of anger, I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Demond blink in uncertainty. I leaned forward just enough to meet his gaze, my voice calm and steady. "I bet," I murmured, just loud enough for the murmuring to stop. I set my glass down, adjusted my suit jacket, and walked away. There was no need for a scene, no need to fight him here. Because I had already won. I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a single call to someone who had been waiting for this moment as long as I had. The line rang once, twice, then a smooth, interested voice answered. Listening, I smiled. Behind me, the party continued, glasses clinking, laughter echoing through the halls. But by the end of the night, Demond Carter would wish he had never met me. The boardroom was sleek, chrome, and glass, reflecting the authority of the woman at the head of the table, Maitland Crawford. She wasn't just an investor. She was a kingmaker and a kingbreaker. She tapped her manicured nails against the glossy surface, her sharp eyes scanning me as I placed my briefcase on the table. "Let's hear it, Nathan," she said, her voice calm. I clicked open the case, revealing a stack of printed documents, emails, reports, bank statements. All the proof I needed. Maitland leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "Demond Carter built his empire on deception," I said smoothly. "He doesn't invest. He manipulates, moves money between companies to inflate stock prices. A con game in everything but name." Her expression didn't change, but more importantly, "He'd been using your name," I added. She didn't speak, but I saw the tension in her posture. I tapped my iPad, playing a recording. Demond's voice crackled through the speaker. "Do you know what it means that Crawford is backing this project? It means there's no risk. She never loses, and neither will you." Maitland's lips pressed into a thin line. I tapped the screen again, displaying bank records and offshore accounts where Demond had been funneling investor funds before they even realized they'd been robbed. She let out a slow breath. "That's a serious accusation, Nathan." I leaned back in my chair. "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." Silence. Then she reached for her phone. One call to the board, one call to the authorities. And just like that, Demond Carter's empire crumbled. 24 hours ago, they laughed at me in my own home. Tonight, the celebration was mine. I stood in my kitchen, sipping bourbon, my phone screen glowing with breaking news. Carter Global under investigation. I glanced toward the living room. Demond was still there, unaware, lounging back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in hand, Samantha by his side. I almost feel bad for Nathan, he mused, swirling his drink. Man just doesn't have what it takes to make it. I took another sip, then stepped into the room. The moment Damon saw my face, his smirk faltered. I tapped my phone. The news report played on the massive TV screen. Breaking. CEO Damon Carter under federal investigation. Silence fell over the party. Damon's face drained of color. He bolted upright, reaching for his phone, only to see the incoming flood of texts, calls, and emails. He was finished. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Enjoy tonight, Dee," I murmured, "because tomorrow you're going to regret this party." With that, I turned and walked away. Samantha called after me, but I didn't stop. By the time the sun rose, Damon Carter's world would be in ruins. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. She may have detected my hesitation because she remarked in a hushed voice, "You're really doing this?" I looked at her. Her eyes fluttered with regret or desperation. As soon as I finished, she took a tiny step forward. "Nathan." But I stopped her with a hand. I bent my head, swallowing. "I never imagined it would end this way. You assumed I'd be the only one left with nothing," I said, my words cold, but my head clear. She didn't dispute it. So I took a deep breath, letting my words sink in before striking the last blow. I spoke with a firm voice. "I love you. I truly did, but the moment you chose Dean, you ceased to be my wife." As she fled, I stepped forward, my gaze piercing hers. "It wasn't just that you were unfaithful, Samantha." Tears filled my eyes. "You were unkind. And now you're paying for it." I realized my error, took a deep breath, and nodded slightly before turning to leave. I didn't look back or pause because, for the first time in years, I no longer belonged to her. I belonged to my future. Damon Carter was no longer a prominent figure in the business world. When the headlines hit all the major outlets, he was a disgrace. His arrest was swift, and the inquiry into his fraudulent activities only intensified. Within 24 hours of my intervention, his assets were frozen. Within 48 hours, investors began to withdraw, and by the end of the week, he was completely destroyed. The same man who had once raised his glass to my failures and mocked me in my own home. Samantha stood by him, her staunchest ally, as he belittled me and replaced me. But whispers travel fast, and now, nobody wanted to be associated with her. Samantha had placed the wrong bet. I knew she had been trying to contact me, phone calls, messages, even an email. But I never replied. The subject line read, "We need to talk." There was nothing left to say. I had given her everything, my love, my loyalty, my devotion. And when things became difficult, she left me for someone she thought would be better. Now she was alone. So, when my phone rang again that night, I wasn't surprised. I didn't even have to check to know who it was. This time, I answered. Her voice was trembling. "Nathan." I paused, staring out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite. "Could you please just—" She took a shaky breath. "I need to talk to you. Explain why." I interrupted. "Please elaborate." She exhaled, and I could hear the humiliation in her voice. "You threw away a 12-year marriage for a man who's now rotting in a jail cell." Silence. Then she muttered, I didn't know this would happen." I laughed coldly. "Of course you didn't. You thought you had it all figured out. That Damon would take care of you. That you'd live in luxury while I wasted away in my failures." She said nothing. She knew I was right. "You were fine seeing me treated like an outsider in my own home," I continued. "Fine humiliating me in front of everyone. But now that your golden ticket is gone, now you want to talk." Her voice cracked. "Nathan, I leaned forward slightly. "No, Samantha. You made a choice, and now you have to live with it." For a moment, I closed my eyes, waiting for her to whisper that I had lost everything. But I hadn't. She had wanted wealth and prestige. I let the victory sink in. She had gambled on a man she thought was strong, a man who could give her everything, and she lost. "Nathan," she said reluctantly, "I was supposed to have everything I ever deserved, but now I don't know where to go, what to do. Please, just tell me." I tilted my head, a small smile curving my lips. "Figure it out." Then I hung up. For years, I had felt trapped in my own marriage, burdened by Samantha's expectations, constantly trying to prove my worth to a woman who had already decided I wasn't enough. But I hadn't failed. And now, nothing was holding me back. Samantha and Damon had dug their own graves. I was finally free. With my divorce finalized, I turned my focus to the one thing I had ignored for too long, myself. My startup, once struggling, had been given new life. Madeline Crawford, the woman who had my back, saw something worth investing in. Days after Damon's downfall, she said to me, "Your company had potential. You just never had the right support." She was right. And now, with her help, I had built something Damond could never have imagined. A business, a reputation, a future. And it was mine. The man who was once ridiculed for never succeeding was now a self-made millionaire. And the best part? Damond wasn't even around to see it. Samantha had always thrived in luxury. She had spent years tearing others down to ensure she stayed on top. But after Damond's arrest, she had nothing. No mansion, no designer clothes, no elite social circle. She went from being adorned in diamonds to struggling to pay rent. A year later, I stepped out of a sleek black car, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored suit. A year ago, I wouldn't have even made the guest list. Now, I was a primary sponsor of the biggest corporate gala of the year. As I entered, CEOs, investors, and business elites nodded in recognition. I was one of them. And then I saw her. Samantha stood in the back of the room. She no longer looked the same. The expensive clothes, the arrogance, the superiority, gone. She hesitated before approaching me. "Nathan," she whispered. I turned slightly, swirling the ice in my whiskey. "You look different," she murmured. I smirked. "So do you." She swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. I didn't think you'd be here." I raised an eyebrow. "And yet here you are." She looked down. "I wasn't invited." I chuckled. Sneaking in." Then she didn't respond. I watched her fidget, the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her. "Nathan," she breathed, her voice shaking. "I made a mistake." I leaned in slightly. "Do you regret choosing Damond?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I do. A year ago, those words would have meant everything to me. Now they meant nothing. I had spent years trying to be enough for her, and she threw it all away." I tilted my head, meeting her gaze one last time. "Look where that got you." She winced but didn't argue. "Are you happy?" she finally asked. For the first time in years, I didn't measure my happiness by her standards. I measured it by my own. And I smiled. "I've never been happier." She nodded slightly, as if she had been expecting that answer. Then she turned and walked away. And for the first time in my life, I let her go.